Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Series 2 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from The Big Picture People. If this is the first time you've listened to the Engaging Internal Comms podcast, welcome to the show. We have a back catalogue of nearly 60 episodes available on our website, which is engagingic.com, but you can also find those through whatever platform you're listening to the podcast on today. I thoroughly recommend you go back and have a listen to previous episodes if you've not done so before. We are now getting towards the end of our second series of the podcast. Don't worry, we're going to be back for the third. We're just putting together our schedule for the third series, which will probably be starting around the end of the year, beginning of next year. But between now and then, we've still got some fantastic interviews coming your way. In the next show, which is episode 29 of Series 2, and that's going out on the 9th of November, I have an amazing interview with Mark Dollins and John Stemmel. Mark and John have both written a new book, which is called Engaging Employees Through Strategic Communication. And I had a fantastic conversation with both of them particularly around the topic of communicating change. Both of them have significant experience in internal communications, you'd imagine, writing a book like that, but also some significant experience of helping organizations navigate through change and the role of communication in that. So we're going to be looking at communicating change as a specific topic for that interview. As I say, it's coming up on the 9th of November. And then going beyond that, a couple of interviews that I've not yet recorded, and I'm hoping to get recorded very shortly. One of those is with someone called Richard Nugent, who is a good friend of mine and also an excellent speaker, and also works with organisations at a very senior level with their management teams. And he's going to be telling us all about the role of hope in communications, which I think is particularly significant at the moment. And he's going to be telling us all about the role of leaders in building hope within the organisation. And then we are hoping for a kind of series finale with an interview with Jen Sproul, who is the head of the Institute of Internal Comms in the UK, and the Institute of Internal Comms spreads further than the UK. But Jen's role is leading the organisation, and we had Jen at the end of the last series, or the first series of Engaging Internal Comms. We're going to get Jen back for the wrap up episode for this series as well, and we're going to be getting her to look back over the previous year, over 2021, in the same way that she helped us look back over 2020, but also looking forward into 2022 as we hopefully continue to emerge from the trauma of the pandemic, but also picking up on some of the key lessons that we've picked up from that. So that's what we've got coming up in future episodes. Hopefully something there of interest for all of you. Just before I move on to today's guest, I just wanted to talk about an event that we're running between now and the next episode, which may be of interest to you. Hopefully it is. On the 3rd of November, that's at 3 o'clock UK time. I keep forgetting, must remember to keep saying that. So that's UK time. I know we've got listeners all over the globe. So 3 o'clock UK time, we're running a free webinar, and that is all about helping your employees to understand your organization's big picture. I've mentioned this before, but basically, very briefly, the premise is that our leaders often find it difficult to explain our organization's mission, vision, values, etc. to employees, and that's often because they're too close to the story themselves, and also it's very clear to them, but they assume it's clear to everyone else. And what we know from our experience, and I'm sure you do as well, when we've got people on the same page with that overall big picture that our leaders have in their heads, it can have a massive boost on employee engagement and on productivity and all sorts of other metrics. So in this webinar that we're going to be running on the 3rd of November, I'm going to be sharing with you some practical tools and techniques that you can use and your leaders can use in order to get your employees on the same page and sharing that big picture with them. So that's at 3 o'clock on the UK time on the 3rd of November. 2021, just in case you're listening to this in the future. And to find that event, you need to go to our website, which is thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Go to our events bar at the top of the page and you'll find it's the first event listed, and you can sign up there. You can get some more information. You can sign up there. It's a free Zoom webinar, dead easy to join, and we'd love to have you come along. So anyway, I think I've spoken for far too long now, and I'm going to let you listen to today's fantastic guest. An area we've covered a couple of times in this series of the podcast has been using audio as an internal communications channel. And it's something I wanted to come back to because I still think that it is a channel that isn't utilized as much as it could be, but offers a huge amount of potential to internal communicators. And it's particularly relevant, I think, at the moment when we're looking at coming from out of the pandemic of 2021 and 2020, when we think about the importance of asynchronous communications, where we are communicating with people at different times and in different places, and sometimes in different time zones as well. And I think audio certainly has a role to play in that. So that's an area that I wanted to explore in more detail. And I also wanted to look at what are some of the most effective tools and formats that we can use to create on-demand and asynchronous communications as well, and how audio fits into that space. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this particular episode. We'll put some links in the show notes back to some of the previous episodes that we've already covered audio in, so you can make some connections with those as well. But this is serves as a standalone episode on its own because I think it covers both the benefits of audio. It also talks about some of the limitations of audio, but it also talks about very pragmatically how you can get started to use audio in an internal comms context. And it's not as difficult as you may think, and it's certainly not as difficult as using video. So hopefully today's episode will provide you with some inspiration to get started with audio, or at least to put it into your thinking when you're putting together your communication strategy. My interviewee today is Brian Landau, who's a co-founder and CEO of Venly, which is an audio platform that enables businesses to seamlessly and privately share their audio content to Slack, SharePoint, Notion, Social Chorus, and also via blogs, email, and PDFs, and all with enterprise analytics and security in mind. Prior to Venly, Brian was EVP at Cadence 13, which was a top podcasting network where he worked on hit shows such as Pod Save America and among many others as well. Brian has recently launched a podcast called The Drip, where he talks to communication specialists about the best practices that they see in their space. And Brian is married and lives in New York with 2 children. Hello, Brian. How are you?
It's amazing how much better my bio sounds when a dignified gentleman with a British accent is reading it.
Well, it's all relative. Believe you me. Some other people in the UK probably see me as a coarse northern accent that I've got. So yeah, but no, I appreciate that, Brian. That's really nice of you to say that.
Yeah, I mean, look, to my Yankee ears, it all sort of sounds the same. So,
oh, wonderful. Well, that's very kind of you. That's very kind of you. Look, Brian, I'm really interested to talk to you today. And we kind of reached out because we've got a kind of common interest. I've got this podcast, and you've obviously got your podcast. Just tell us a little bit about that before we dive into the kind of content. Tell me a little bit more about The Drip, the podcast. Who you've been speaking to, just so our listeners, because you've probably got a shared audience who might be interested in catching up on a few of your episodes. Give us a bit of a plug for your podcast.
Yeah, well, that's really gracious of you. And I should say that I reached out to you because I'm a fan of your podcast.
Aww.
So that's very gracious of you to say that.
Okay.
So as you read in the bio just a moment ago, I've been in podcasting really throughout my career. And before podcasting was actually cool, now people return your phone calls. A couple of years ago, they were like, what is that thing? Where do I find a podcast?
Yeah.
And from where I sat on the business side, working really on partnerships and monetization and strategy for podcasts, there was a lot of business leadership content, a lot of, if we're being candid, ivory tower pontification about the future of the industry. And what I didn't see enough of, and what I was finding a craving for, was content from practitioners, people who have titles like director and VP, people who are actually doing the work, who are building the strategies, yes, but then are also executing on them as well.
Yeah.
And that's really where the show focuses. So it's much more of a boots on the ground approach to marketing and communications.
Yeah.
And I have also interviewed people who sit in HR seats, for example, or sales enablement seats. But the through line for the content is always like, how are you communicating? Right?
Yeah.
What is working? What is not working? Are there best practices? Are there lessons learned? And it's been especially interesting to have launched that podcast during COVID, because a lot of these strategies are being defined in real time.
Yeah.
Right? We're rethinking all of this stuff. So that's what the show is about. And it's been a mix of people who work at places like Hilton and American Express and SAP, and then also people who work at high growth technology startups. And it's been interesting to have those episodes live next to one another. There's a lot of shared similarities.
Yeah.
But then also, of course, when you're working at a venture funded, pre-IPO startup, it's a little bit different than if you're working at, Wells Fargo. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been really personally gratifying, but I think also the feedback that I've received from listeners has been, I like having these two distinct points of view live right next to each other on the same topic area.
Yeah, yeah. No, it sounds a very similar story to our podcast as well. We started in lockdown, and it's been amazing in terms of both the differences and also the similarities that our guests bring as well. So it really kind of resonates. So you mentioned there though, let's use that as a springboard into the conversation. So you mentioned there around kind of COVID, and one of the areas I wanted to talk to you about was this idea of and I guess first of all we might want to just kind of define it, this difference between synchronous and asynchronous communication, and why there is a difference and how each of those work. So you want to tell us a little bit more about the way you see the role of synchronous and asynchronous comms in particularly not just, I guess, because hopefully we are coming through the pandemic now, but we are going to be going into a very different kind of working world, which most people are kind of coining as hybrid now. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what your vision and what your thoughts around that are?
Yeah, I think this is sort of the question that most communications professionals are really grappling with today, right? What needs to be synchronous and what needs to be asynchronous? And so when I enter into conversations with people who are thinking about internal communications and employee engagement, the question is really, does this need to be in all hands? Or can this be a piece of content or a piece of messaging that is consumed 3 days from now, right? And I think with distributed work, it's really put more of a spotlight on the fact that actually people are all over the world right now, right? And we can't all be on that 9 a.m. all hands because they're, in a different time zone or they're in a different continent. And so making these decisions over, hey, what does it mean for us to have this shared experience? And also, what does it mean for us to potentially seed content that can be consumed, 3 days, a week later and still have value? That type of decision tree at the very top is where I think a lot of internal communicators are really starting to grapple. It's getting better, right? Emails are harder, I think, today than they were even 2 years ago. People are feeling a little inundated by emails. I think we're all feeling a little zoomed out. So, can this content live in other formats? If so, where does that what is the channel strategy, right? Am I still sending it via email? Have I adopted Slack or Microsoft Teams or, social course? Like, what does my engagement platform look like? Am I hitting, content across all of those channels if I'm using multiple, and many businesses are. So I think it starts sort of at like, what is synchronous and what is asynchronous? And then there's decisions that need to funnel off of that.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about synchronous, we're talking about live in the moment. We're talking about maybe everybody's on the one sort of Zoom call or Microsoft Teams call, or and then obviously asynchronous, we're talking about on demand when I consume it when I can. That's the kind of key difference that we're talking about there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. And I guess, given what you do, let's talk about what are some of those asynchronous tools that are particularly effective, and what are some of the things that we can use to do that, create that on-demand content within the organization so that, we've got the right content at the right point where people want it and in a format that they can engage with. What are some of the tools that we can be thinking of as internal communicators in that space?
Well, I think it starts with what tools are already in place, right? You are almost definitely using email. And email is this very tricky medium, right? Where it depends on the etiquette, I think, within the company. There are some businesses where it's like, I send you an email, I expect you to reply to that within 2 hours. There are other businesses where it's like, I send you an email and I might not even need a reply on it, but it needs to live there for you to go reference back again. Right. So I think defining the etiquette and the culture around email is a really important thing that I think a lot of businesses tend to overlook. But have you adopted Slack, for example,
Yeah.
right? Slack has an immediacy to it, right? This is just rapid fire collaboration. And there's definitely very clever ways to organize your content there or to organize your teams. But, that is going to be like more of a synchronous type of experience, even if it is done remotely and virtually, right? Whereas SharePoint or Jive or whatever you might be using for an intranet, I think that's a little bit more of a long tail approach. So defining sort of the channels that you have access to and then saying, all right, look, here's the purpose that we have for SharePoint or Notion. This is going to be more of a repository, whereas Slack and email actually in our culture is going to be more of an immediate reaction to that. Defining that at the start, I think, is really, really important. But then, of course, you have written word, you have video content, and video could be the synchronous all hands, but video can also be the executive taking a 2-minute video, like selfie style video, and posting that to Slack, right? That's also video content.
Yeah.
The space that I spend all my time is in audio, and audio, I think, is really sort of the ultimate on-demand medium, and one that's incredibly underrated for businesses, even though we are starting to see businesses adopt audio very meaningfully as a way to communicate and engage with employees internally. But just going back a minute, when we think about is this synchronous or asynchronous, audio sort of this secret tool that exists for asynchronous creation. It doesn't really fit. There are definitely the Clubhouse app is an example of synchronous audio. Slack recently rolled out a new feature called Huddle. That's synchronous audio. But asynchronous audio, right? Creating a podcast, for example, or a piece of messaging that can be consumed over the next day, 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, whatever that might be. Audio is offering a really powerful format for people who are trying to communicate and broadcast out across the organization.
Okay. And I guess you're kind of preaching to the choir for me, and I guess for people listening to this podcast, we're kind of almost preaching to an audience that almost kind of buys into audio, but probably doesn't realize why audio. Maybe they haven't thought about audio, and we've covered this before on other episodes. But I always think it's really interesting to see whether I have a view on why I think audio is a really effective channel, and I'm just really interested to know what yours. So can you tell us what is the role of audio in that, my kind of messaging, and particularly, as you said, in that kind of asynchronous space, and what is it about audio that makes it a really effective approach to communication?
Yeah, look, let's just start at a really basic level, which is if you are listening to this podcast right now, what day of the week is it and what time is it? Because the data suggests that actually you're listening to this during working hours. And so if you are a business and your employees and your partners and your stakeholders, maybe even if they're external, are listening to audio content during working hours, you have a consumer behavior that you can actually replicate for internal use. And I think that's really the key part. Like, communicate to how people want to be consuming with the content, right? So there's a data point that shows that 40% of adults in the United States and in the United Kingdom have listened to a podcast in the last month. That's across the general population. But then there's another data point that shows that 83% of corporate workers want to be communicated with by leadership in podcasting. So podcast listenership is over indexing against corporate America and corporate United Kingdom workers, right? Corporate UK workers. And so I think it's sort of starting from a place of, well, how is this messaging going to be received? And what are the formats for that? People don't necessarily want to sit there on another 10-minute video, right? Like, maybe I can now go for a walk, or I can cook my dinner, or fold my laundry, take my kid to the playground, and still consume this really valuable piece of information. So that's sort of at a very high level. But then sort of like, why else audio? It's super intimate as a format, right? It's just a really authentic, genuine way to communicate with people. There isn't a visual bias. And because of that, not only do people lock into the words, but I think there's a really unique opportunity for an organization to elevate more voices from across the organization in this format, as opposed to in video, for example, right? Where not everyone is comfortable being on video. And so, when you couple all of these things together, the authenticity, the lack of visual bias, the fact that your listeners actually, or your first audience, your employees are listeners of podcast content anyway, and then you couple that with the fact that there's immense controls on the corporate side for podcast content, right? Like Craig, you're going to edit this a little bit, right? the same behavior exists for a corporation. Like, you can do post-production on this content. It's not live, like it's on-demand content. So you're able to listen to a piece of content before it goes live and before it gets published. So before that executive, puts their foot in their mouth, right, you can actually have ears on that piece of content beforehand, and you can maybe do some light production work, and the end product will sound totally natural, totally fluent to the listener. And I think that's really unique from video. And to be clear, I'm a proponent of video. I think video plays a very important role in the corporation. But video content can be expensive to produce. It's harder to edit. Like, there's these choppy cuts, right? I think oftentimes video content at the enterprise feels very like a sizzle. And, your employees don't necessarily need to be sold to, right? They want to be communicated with. And so that's a little bit of a long answer to what was a very straightforward question. My apologies. But I think there are a bunch of different factors as to sort of why audio is important at the enterprise.
I think you were amazingly succinct, actually, and you touched on the 3 points that I always say I think that are really important. I mean, I go in reverse order. I think yes. I mean, I think there's a massive tendency to overthink video and kind of go for perfection, whereas with audio, yeah, it needs to be good. But I think you can be more authentic, and as you say, editing is a much, much, much easier process, and you can create the amount of content you can create, the kind of ratio of how long you need to spend creating it compared to what you can actually use in the end point is sort of a factor of multiples different. And so I think that's one thing. I think the other point is the intimacy. I totally agree with you. The fact that you are literally in someone's head, is if someone's got their earbuds in, and that you are in their head. And also I think the amount of time that you get with people in audio, video, anything more than 5 minutes, and people are kind of thinking, right, when's this going to end? Whereas it's not uncommon. I listen to podcasts, they're 45 minutes, an hour, even some that, overly ambitious sometimes, more than an hour. But I think the length of time and you get, I was interested in you saying a lot of podcasts get listened to at work. Interestingly, I listen to most of my podcasts, whether they're for fun or for personal development or whatever, or just for kind of listening to other people's podcasts. I tend to do it when I'm not at work. I'll tend to do it. I'm running. I'm kind of out on for a walk or whatever, and I like to kind of multitask. And you can't do that with video. You can't. Well, you can, but you tend to get kind of very bloody knees quite quickly by tripping over things if you try and watch a video when you're out walking. I agree with all of those three things that you said there, Brian. I think they're all absolutely relevant, and what for me makes audio a really unique and powerful medium. Where do
could I hop in for 1 second?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
So I think you're totally spot on that, and I think what you're touching on is right. I do think that the power of audio in large part is its portability. You listen to it while you're driving to the store, or you're out for a walk or a run. But what we've learned, I think, is pre-COVID, you were going for a run at 7 a.m. or 6 o'clock at night. Now you're going for a run during lunch, right?
Yeah.
You're working from home,
Sure.
and sort of these behaviors that we have been remixed. There's a lot more happening from 9 to 5, and like, I'm gonna go for a walk after this. It'll be lunchtime. It's summertime here in New York. I'm gonna go for a walk, be outside, and I'm going to listen to a podcast that wasn't necessarily afforded to me when I was commuting into to my office building, and I was there. And so I think that the time is still happening during office hours. But you're right. The sort of the behavior is a little bit different, because now what we experience in our day-to-day work is a little bit different. There's a little bit more leniency, at least with progressive companies that say, you should go for a walk during the middle of your day and unlock yourself from that computer.
Yeah.
That's where I think the real power is.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess that I know whenever we've talked about podcasting before, one of the areas we've talked about is where we get started, because I think, again, there's this temptation sometimes to overthink and overcomplicate things, particularly in larger organizations. So if you're going to say, right, okay, we want to explore audio, we think it's the right channel for us, we want to kind of we want to get that out there. What are some of the things that you would recommend to an internal communications person or someone who's responsible for internal comms? How do we get started? How do we scale it? How do we get audio into our business if that's something we've decided is going to work for us?
Yeah. So again, I think it starts with sort of what are the asynchronous on-demand content experiences that you're maybe already creating, and where are the opportunities there to align that with your editorial calendar? Do you have task force, right? For example, is there a DEI task force? Is there a CSR task force? Is there a task force around parenting? What would it look like to go and elevate those voices and to enable those voices to go and talk? And again, you then, as the head of internal communications, I think this is a really important point, and one that gets lost sometimes, is you don't need to be the content creator, but you should be the moderator,
Yeah.
right? You are running point on the initiative, but what does it sound like to empower the voices from within the organization to contribute content to the organization? And I think starting with your task force, for example, is really important. I think you might be surprised to find just how many people are really eager to create their own content, and how many people within your organization already have their own podcast and would love to contribute content to the greater good of the business. So I think there's willing voices already. Identifying those voices, coaching those voices is important, but you, as the head of internal communications, like, you just don't need to be the one on the mic unless you want to, and that's great. And in fact, one of the most successful internal podcasts that any of our client partners create, is something that's called Talk Nerdy to Me. And it's the head of internal communications talking to the head of product and engineering once a month about product updates and software updates, because even though it's a tech company, the majority of the employees are non-technical.
Yeah. So
And that's a 15-minute podcast, right? To your point, like, you could go a little bit deeper there. That, as a 15-minute video, I think everyone's eyes would be bleeding at the end of it. But 15-minute audio, it aligns very much with the behaviors that we already have. And it's just a super successful, the head of internal communications, they use Slack. She solicits questions in advance of every podcast. There's tons of engagement. There's tons of follow-up. They create threads in Slack to follow up questions with the executives that get interviewed as part of this. So there's low-hanging fruit. I'm sorry to use that jargon, but there's low-hanging fruit within the org, and some of it just fits very, very seamlessly with what you're already doing. It's just a little bit deeper, a little bit more opportunity to explain a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's a really kind of strategic answer to that question. I mean, it might be that we don't answer this now. It might be there's something that we could point people towards. But I'm also thinking from a kind of, well, where do I start? What equipment do I need? What kind of software do I need? What capabilities do I need to start to curate and create audio? I mean, what would you recommend to a reasonably large organization that's never done audio to start to where to get started on that side of things as well? Do I bring someone in who's an expert in this area, or can I do it myself? Do we kind of watch some videos on YouTube and work it out ourselves? What would you recommend in that sort of situation?
Well, I think there's the equipment side, which is, right now we're recording on Zencastr.
Yeah.
When I interviewed you for my podcast, we used Zoom.
Yeah.
There are very, very effective, very low technical solutions for actually capturing the audio content.
Yeah.
I'm just using headphones right now, right, with an inline mic. I wouldn't recommend using AirPods or something like that, something that's Bluetooth enabled. Something that plugs into your computer is really important. I think chances are at least one of the people, if it's an interview style show, at least one of the individuals will be remote. So using something that is familiar, like a Zoom or a Zencastr, and there's a bunch of really great solutions out there that are really affordable for recording. I think that's a really great place to start. I wouldn't overthink it. You don't need to build out like a state-of-the-art studio to do high quality audio content.
Yeah.
With respect to producing the content, I had spent my entire career in podcasting on the business side. I produced my own podcast. It's my first time doing that. I would consider myself to be quite good at it at this point. It took me 6 hours to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
So, I think it's something that can be very easily self-taught, and it's actually quite fun. It's been a bit of a creative release for me, actually sitting there and taking out coughs and ums. You didn't cough a whole lot, Craig, in our interview.
I'm a pro. I've sort of conditioned myself not to cough or hopefully anyway. I probably do, but I don't realize it.
You are super fluent, but in some instances you have to like clean it up. And actually I found that to be quite fun. But I think there's sort of this other question, which is, if you're a company of some size, if you have 300 employees or more, chances are there's someone in marketing or content creative services that knows how to use these tools already.
That's a good point.
And it's a really fun thing to do, is to like edit podcasts. Super fun, because again, chances are the person who's sitting in creative services loves listening to podcasts, right? So this isn't like some huge tax on their day. It's something that they can be invited into the process with.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important, is really reaching out and saying, this is to the question that was just before, is like, well, where should we start? Call these things shows, call these things podcasts, create, original show names, and identify a music bed, like create some IP around this. I think this is especially important if you're trying to wrap in an executive to be the host, is don't call it like another communications motion, because you'll never get that buy-in.
Yeah.
But if the executive feels like they've got a show and that show launches on the first Wednesday of every month, then they're going to be bought into that process, and it's going to become a priority, because look, we're people, and people at times can be quite vain in this way, right? So they're the host of the show, and they're going to want it to be great. And so that makes for better content.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I agree with you, Brian. I think I know. I think that one of the things is, it goes back to the kind of some people who've only got any experience of video will kind of think, oh my goodness, it's going, it's a magnitude of difference from my experience of recording and producing and editing podcasts as it is to video. It's so much easier, and so therefore you don't need to. I think you can just get on with it and learn it. And as you say, you've probably got people within your organization who do this already and will love the opportunity to kind of show how how smart they are. So I completely agree with you. And I think I think you can get someone in to come and do it for you, but it's not as much fun as doing it yourself. If and again, it gives people a chance to sort of develop and learn and learn new skills, and it's not a whole bunch of waste of time like it is learning to use kind of complicated video editing tools. I've been there, and I know how frustrating that can be as well. Well, it's fun as well. But look, one quick question, Brian, before we wrap up is the $65 million. Well, it might be the $65 million question. The question we always get asked, or internal communicators always get asked: what am I going to get for my money? So, if we're going to go down an audio route, what is the return? I mean, I guess you can say this for any form of comms. What is the ROI? What's the return on investment? And what can I get? What can I expect to see from audio that maybe other channels aren't going to give me?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm a little bit biased in this because, as you mentioned in my bio, I operate a technology platform that facilitates audio in the workspace, right? And we do it with security and privacy. So what that means is you can share audio content directly to Slack. And we have a Slack integration, and that content lives there privately. So the only people who can access that content are those that are already part of the approved workspace.
Sure.
And then there's also embeddable players that can be embedded on SharePoint and Notion and Social Chorus, Jive. And in the settings, you can approve specific domains. So what that means is, if it's craig.sharepoint.com and that's my approved domain, the only place in the world where that piece of audio content can live and be listened to and be embedded is that specific domain that's approved. And so then there's analytics that exists on every piece of content by every creator, regardless of where it's been distributed to. So right now, ROI in audio is being defined in large part by listens per piece of content. And it's really a very table stakes type of metric. What's interesting about our technology is there are a lot of businesses that use both Slack and some sort of intranet, and you're going to be able to share the same piece of content to both destinations and see the engagement on that exact piece of content across both destinations. And I think that's an insight that many internal communicators really don't have, don't possess. And so understanding sort of the engagement on Slack on a piece of content and measuring that against their SharePoint with respect to like, what time was it listened to? How long was it listened to? Did someone return to that piece of content? Is 3-minute pieces of content performing better or worse than 10-minute pieces of content? Are content on culture performing better than content on leadership? Like, these are insights that I think in large part can inform an employee engagement strategy. One of the things that we've built, a frustration that I've had operating in podcast circles, is that it's really hard to measure outcomes in podcasting, right? You get on your podcast, Craig, like you see download numbers and not a whole lot else, right? It's not that great. It's a little bit of a black box. So if listens is sort of a top of the funnel activation, what does the bottom of the funnel activation look like? So what we've built on our players is a customizable call to action button. So on every piece of audio content, every player, whether you're sharing it to Slack or SharePoint or whatever that might be, there's a call to action button that you can customize. So it might be open enrollment, right? For our new benefits is click here, right? And that lives on the player. It might be you want to integrate into a pulse survey, right? It's the CEO doing a podcast. A lot of companies do like these heroes initiatives, right? Where nominate a colleague who's a hero. Like you can do the nomination form right there on that piece of content. Maybe there's a big blog post that just got published and you want your colleagues to share that and like it on LinkedIn. You can link to the post on LinkedIn. So for us, what we're migrating towards is not necessarily listens per piece of content as the ROI, but actions per piece of content. And we think that's just a much deeper, much more involved, much more tactile way to approach this. And audio, for all of the benefits that we've been talking about for the last 25 minutes, audio offers now potentially in using our platform an opportunity to go that much deeper in the funnel to drive real business outcomes for you.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think from a balance perspective, one of the things when we said all of the positives of audio, one of the frustrations as you've identified is that, you know, if someone's out running or if they're, you know, if they're listening to their podcast, it's you know, called, we know it from our own podcast, you know, as you say, it's a very crude measure, listens, and what we ultimately want people to do is visit our website and listen to the podcast there and click on the links that we've got, and so they can get all of that richness that's associated with the show, and we can also then see that we're getting that interaction. But as you say, it's difficult, but I like the way that you've kind of integrated it into the platforms that people listen to it on, so you can track that through. So I think that's a really, really positive thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, right now, you know, if you want to create podcast content, audio content at the enterprise, you sort of have two options. You can either embed an MP3 to like Slack and SharePoint and whatever, and in its worst case, that content can be downloaded and repurposed by a bad actor, right? Like it is very easy to create a deep fake piece of audio content if that's what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
In its best case, you don't get any listener insights on an MP3.
No.
So you're going through this communications motion of creating audio content and you have no idea how your communications is landing. So that's what most companies are doing. There are private podcasting apps. And so what that means is the CEO is going to create a podcast, and all of my employees now need to download this third-party walled garden app in order to listen to that content.
Yeah.
Our thesis is really different. Like, we believe that audio should live in the flow of work, right? And so it should live within your Slack. It should live within your SharePoint. It should live within whatever intranet you're using with security and with analytics, because maybe you actually don't get great analytics on your SharePoint. But if you're embedding our player on your SharePoint, you're getting incredible world-class analytics, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what a lot of internal communicators are grappling with is context switching. And so to say, listen, our written word content and our photos and our videos can all live here, but I got to then ask my employees to go to this other thing to listen. That's not a thesis that we think makes a ton of sense. And we're really excited to be partnering with companies and putting their audio content right into the flow of their work with, again, the security, the privacy, and the analytics that's required. And then also the action step that our product uniquely provides.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Excellent, Brian. Well, I really appreciate that. I mean, you're not off the hook yet though. So I've got a couple of final questions for you. The easy one is where can our listeners find out more about you? I mean, we'll put the link into your podcast. Your podcast is available on the usual places, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's shared to Apple and Spotify, and here in the United States, iHeart is a big podcast aggregator. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's available. It's called The Drip. Yeah. And it's about how to caffeinate your campaigns, and it's available wherever it is that you listen to podcasts.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put a link into your show, obviously, and then anywhere else, any other links that you want me to put into the show notes so people can find out more about you and what you do and about your work at Veenly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, look, I would encourage anyone who wants to just, workshop audio to just send me an email directly. It's Brian, Brian, at Veenly, VENNLY.co. So it's .co.
Yeah.
And so anyone who sort of is getting started, or maybe they're already creating audio content and need to rethink the distribution, I'm happy to do, a workshop on office hours and just chat through that. It's by far the most fun part of my day is talking strategies with people. It's what I love the most. So it's never a burden.
Awesome. Well, we'll put that link in the show notes as well, so people are kind of trying to scroll that down, and we'll also put a link into your website as well. So they're the easy questions. I've kind of be able to give you as much thinking time as possible, because I did kind of spring this on you just before we started recording, because I forgot to tell you beforehand. But I always ask my interviewees at the end of our conversations something that even people who know them reasonably well, I guess it's colleagues, friends, people around your immediate circle, whether private or personal, whatever, but people who would go, oh, I never knew that about you, Brian, whether it's something you've done in the past, it's something you do now, or it's just something that you're fascinated with that no one would know about you. So over to you, Brian. I hope you've managed to conjure something up for us.
Well, I mentioned just before, and this won't be my answer, but I have only recently adopted audio production as a skill set, and I've come to really like it. And I think those who know me would be very surprised to know that like I geek out in audio enginering now. And I take great pride in layering in a music bed. Like that is actually something that I think would shock most people, but that's sort of cheating a little bit.
Yeah.
Look, I think I'm going to answer your question a little bit differently, which is sort of a new hobby of mine. So I have young children. I have a son who's almost 7 years old, and he's really into music. And I think that a lot of parents can appreciate you're driving around with young kids, and the music that's available to like 3 to 7-year-olds is like, you're just trying your hardest not to careen onto oncoming traffic. It's just like the worst. I can't listen to Coco Melon anymore.
Yeah.
So I've been taking my son in particular, and now my daughter who's younger is like along for the ride. But I've been taking him along a musical journey of things that we can both appreciate. And what I've found is actually like he's a bit of a hard rocker.
Oh wow.
Which is great for there's lots there, but it's sort of like unexpected. And so I have to now curate playlists that can sort of be age appropriate and also like very aggressive rock and roll. So
Oh wow.
for example, like he loves the Foo Fighters, he loves AC/DC, he loves like a lot of that classic rock where there's a little bit of an edge to it.
Yeah.
And I was like, look, Jack, you love the piano. We started with Queen, right? I should say Queen was the gateway to like the Foo Fighters and AC/DC.
Yeah.
But he loved the piano. I was like, oh, let's listen to Billy Joel and Elton
Yeah.
John. And he's like, Dad, this is good, but I don't know if it's for me.
So he's centered on rock then. That's
He's centered on rock.
Oh yeah.
And look, he's young yet, so we'll see where his musical journey goes. But this is a new hobby of mine, is identifying new musical acts, past and present, to introduce to him. So
wow.
I'm sort of cheating your question a little bit.
No,
but maybe
I like it.
If there's some parents who are listening, I think they can probably appreciate some of that anyway.
I know I like it, and I'm all he'll be the coolest kid in the class if he's into the Foo Fighters when he's he's starting junior school. So yeah, no, I mean definitely. I tried to educate my kids on music, but not like literally, but it seemed to fall on deaf ears. Their musical tastes are very different to mine now. But that's life.
But it's become a little bit of a complicated thing. I mean, I love Dave Grohl. I think Dave Grohl is a pretty remarkable, not only musician, but I like what he stands for in general. And so like Jack has watched, my son has watched a bunch of music videos. And so now it's time for school, and I need him to get a haircut because his hair is like in his eyes.
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
Jack, it's time to like, clean this up a little bit. Like we've got school starting. And he's like, Dad, I want to look like Dave Grohl.
Yeah. No, definitely. I don't blame him. No, I
don't blame him either. I mean, I don't have enough hair to have that type of argument. So, like go for it, kiddo. But yeah, anyway.
Well, I'm a little bit older than you, and certainly a lot older than your son. But I'm kind of Grohl, kind of Nirvana era. That's my kind of thing. So you want to take him back a little bit further. You get him into Nirvana. That's my kind of my kind of favorite sort of era and album of all time. I guess one of them anyway. So yeah. Can't go far wrong with Dave Grohl.
For sure.
Look, that's been brilliant. Well, there we go. We turned in audio, a conversation about audio ended with audio, but in a slightly different context. So that's absolutely fantastic, Brian. I wish you all the best for the future to you and your family. And it'd be lovely. I hope at some point I'll try and find an excuse to come out to New York at some point. We'll meet up and we'll have a coffee or a beer or something together. Yeah.
I appreciate that. You don't have to bend my arm to go visit London either. It's one of the truly remarkable cities in the world. So thank you. It's a privilege to be talking with you.
Take care, Brian. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers now.
So, thank you for listening to Engaging Internal Comms. Hope you found this episode useful. We'd love to get your feedback and thoughts about the show. So, and also any questions or ideas that you've got for things you'd like us to cover in future episodes. So you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can get in touch with us via the contact form on our website, which is engagingic.com. Also, you'll be able to sign up for our mailing list there, and we'll send you relevant news about the show, new episodes, and also anything that we think you might be interested in when it comes to internal communications or employee engagement. If you like the show and you haven't already done so, please subscribe to it via your podcast service. And also you can subscribe to it via the links on our podcast page, which again is engagingic.com. If you know anyone else who might be interested in the show, please distribute it to them. Please let them know about it. We want to try and grow a community of people here who are contributing to the show, giving us new ideas for episodes and things that you'd like to cover in future. So thank you very much.